The notice came pinned to the gate at first light, the wax seal already cracked by the morning frost, and Carys Greystone read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to fold the parchment and slip it into her apron pocket where her children would not see. "Mama, the gray ewe is limping again," Greenock called from the stone barn, his voice sharp with the particular irritation of an 11-year-old boy who resented every task that fell to him now that his father was gone. "Check her hoof for stones," Carys called back, her own voice steadier than she felt. "Mind you hold her proper or she will kick you into next week." Little Mersa appeared at her elbow, 6 years old and already showing the stubborn set of jaw that had characterized her father. "What did the paper say? Estate business," Carys said, which was true enough. "Nothing for you to worry over, you look worried." "Then I am doing the worrying for both of us. Go help your brother. Greenock told me to go away." "Then help me. The chickens want feeding." Mersa's face brightened, and she scampered off toward the hen house, dark braids bouncing against her green shoulders. Carys watched her go and felt the familiar twist of love and terror that came with being responsible for 2 lives on 900 acres of moorland that seemed determined to slide back into wilderness now that there was only one pair of hands to hold it. The notice had given her, until Martinmas, 4 months to bring her lamb count up to what the estate expected, or the tenancy would be consolidated into the neighboring holding. A polite word for eviction, a polite word for failure. She had been married to Carys Greystone for 14 years before the rockfall took him, working this land side by side, and in the 8 months since she had learned that what took 2 people working dawn to dark could not be managed by one, no matter how early she rose or how late she worked. The walls were crumbling. The winter hay was half what it should be. The flock had lambed poorly in spring because she had been too exhausted to check them through the nights, and she had lost 3 ewes to the fox because the wall gaps had not been mended in time. She could not afford to hire help. She could barely afford to feed her children. The morning passed in the usual rush of tasks. She checked the gray ewe herself, found a crack in the hoof wall and packed it with tar, then moved on to walk the north pasture wall where the stones had tumbled in the last storm. Greenock followed her at a distance, radiating resentment, while Mersa chased grasshoppers through the heather and narrated her adventures to no one in particular. "We could ask Uncle Torvin for help," Greenock said suddenly. Carys straightened from the wall, her back protesting. "Your uncle has his own farm to manage. He has 3 sons to help him. We have nobody." The words hit harder than he probably intended. Carys studied her son, seeing too much of Dravik in the set of his shoulders, the way he refused to look at her directly when he was angry. "We have each other." "It is not enough." "Then we will make it enough." He kicked at a loose stone, sending it skittering down the slope. "Father would have, your father is dead, Greenock." The words came out harsher than she meant them. She softened her voice. "I know you miss him. I miss him too. But wishing will not bring him back, and we have work to do." He turned and stalked away across the moor, hands shoved into his pockets. Carys let him go. The boy needed space to grieve in his own way, even if that way included anger at her for still being alive when Dravik was not. She was resetting a gate post that afternoon when she saw the man walking up the track from the lower road. Tall, human, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who had walked far and expected to walk farther. He wore rough work clothes and carried a heavy canvas pack, and when he drew close enough she could see he was perhaps 40, with brown hair going gray at the temples and the weathered face of someone who worked outdoors. Carys straightened, wiping her hands on her trousers. Strangers were rare this far up the dale and rarely brought good news. "Help you," she called. He stopped at a polite distance. "Looking for work if you have it. Name is Lucas Norwood. I am a waller by trade, but I can turn my hand to most things on a farm." She studied him. He had steady gray eyes and calloused hands, and there was something quiet about him that suggested he would not waste words or her time. "I cannot pay much. Did not expect you could this far up the valley, but I saw your walls on the walk-in, and they need help. Room and board would do if you can spare it." "Why here?" Carys asked bluntly. "There are bigger farms down valley that pay in coin. Bigger farms have enough hands. You look like you need them more." It was true enough that she could not argue, and the walls did need help. And Martinmas was coming. "I have 2 children," she said. "They come first. Before any work, before anything else. If you cannot abide that, best you move on now." Lucas Norwood looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "Then so do I." The words were so unexpected that Carys blinked. "What? Your children come first, so they come first for me too if I am working here. Only makes sense." She waited for the rest of it, the qualification, the condition. When it did not come, she said, "There is a loft in the barn. It is clean enough, meals with us such as they are. I need the north wall rebuilt before the autumn storms, and the pasture fences mended, and the hay barn roof has a leak. I can do all that. Martinmas is the deadline. 4 months," he nodded. "Best get started then." She showed him the barn and the loft space, which was swept clean and had a decent pallet stuffed with heather and a wool blanket she had woven herself. He set his pack down and looked around, then nodded as if it met his standards. "Supper is at sunset," Carys said. "Do not be late." "The children eat first." "Understood." She left him there and went back to her work, feeling oddly unsettled. The offer had been too easy. Men did not simply appear and offer their labor for room and board unless they wanted something else, and she had learned to be wary of what that something else might be. But the walls needed mending, and she needed help, and Martinmas was coming whether she was ready or not. That evening, Lucas came to the house exactly at sunset and waited outside until she called him in. The cottage was small but well kept, with a scrubbed table and a hearth that radiated warmth. Greenock sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, while Mersa perched on a stool and stared at the stranger with frank curiosity. "This is Lucas Norwood," Carys said. "He will be helping with the walls. Lucas, my son Greenock, and my daughter Mersa." "Hello," Mersa said brightly. "Are you going to live in our barn for a time?" Lucas said. "Why? Your mother needs help with the walls." "Why, Mersa," Carys said warningly. "Enough." They ate in awkward silence, or mostly silence except for Mersa's cheerful commentary on everything from the taste of the stew to the way Lucas held his spoon. Greenock said nothing, radiating hostility, and Carys found herself watching Lucas for signs of irritation or condescension. She saw neither. He ate steadily, answered Mersa's questions with patience, and ignored Greenock's glares with the ease of someone who had dealt with sullen boys before. After supper, he thanked her for the meal and returned to the barn without lingering. Carys watched him go and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I do not like him," Greenock announced. "You have not given him a chance. We do not need him." "We do," Carys said quietly, "and you know it." Greenock shoved back from the table and disappeared into the small room he shared with Mersa. Carys sighed and began clearing the dishes. Mersa helped, chattering about the chickens and the grasshoppers and whether Lucas knew any good stories. "He seems nice," Mersa said. "He seems competent," Carys corrected. "There is a difference." "What is the difference? Nice is easy. Competent means he will actually help. Can he not be both?" Carys smiled despite herself. "Perhaps we will see." Lucas started on the north wall the next morning, working with the methodical patience of someone who knew his trade. Carys watched him from a distance as she went about her own work, noting the way he selected each stone for fit and balance. the way he tested the wall's stability as he built. It was good work, the kind that would last. Myrsa appointed herself his assistant, carrying stones that were too small to be useful and asking an endless stream of questions. Lucas answered them all without apparent annoyance, explaining the principles of dry stone walling in terms a 6-year-old could understand. "Why do you not use mud?" Myrsa asked. "Frost would crack it come winter. Stones fit together. They can shift with the ground without breaking." "Why do you put the big stones at the bottom?" "Weight holds the wall steady. Little stones at the top mean less pressure." "Why, Myrsa, let the man work," Carys called. "She is fine," Lucas said. "Keeps me from getting bored." Greenock, meanwhile, made a point of staying as far from Lucas as possible, working the south pasture with grim determination. Carys saw the way her son pushed himself, trying to do the work of a grown man, and her heart ached for him. Days turned into weeks. The north wall grew steadily, a testament to Lucas's skill. He mended the pasture fences, rehung gates that had sagged on their posts, and patched the hay barn roof with such efficiency that Carys found herself wondering what else had been slowly falling apart that she had stopped noticing. He worked from dawn until the light failed, and never once asked for more than she had offered. At meals he was quiet, listening more than he spoke, and he had a way of deflecting Myrsa's more intrusive questions with gentle humor that made even Greenock crack an occasional smile. "Do you have children?" Myrsa asked one evening. "I did," Lucas said. "Long time ago." "Where are they now, Myrsa?" Carys said sharply. Lucas shook his head. "It is all right. They died, little one. Fever when they were young." Myrsa's eyes went wide. Both of them, both of them." "And their mother?" The table went very quiet. Even Greenock looked up, his hostility tempered by something that might have been sympathy. "I am sorry," Carys said. "It was a long time ago." Lucas's voice was steady, but Carys could hear the old grief underneath. "I have made my peace with it." After that, Greenock's attitude toward Lucas softened slightly, though he still kept his distance. Carys understood. The boy did not want to like this stranger, did not want to accept help from anyone who was not his father. But need was slowly wearing down his resistance. The work continued. Carys found herself falling into a rhythm with Lucas, the two of them dividing tasks with unspoken efficiency. He never told her what to do or questioned her judgment, but he had a way of seeing what needed doing and simply doing it. When the gray ewe's hoof infection worsened, he built a small pen where she could be kept clean and dry. When the henhouse roof began to leak, he thatched it with heather before Carys even noticed the problem. And always, always, he put the children first. When Myrsa wanted to learn how to stack stones, he spent an afternoon teaching her, even though it meant his own work went slower. When Greenock's jacket tore, Lucas spent an evening mending it with careful stitches, because Carys's hands were cracked and bleeding from the wool work, and he had noticed. It unsettled her, this quiet competence, this assumption of responsibility for things that were not his problem. She did not know what to do with kindness that asked for nothing in return. "Why are you here?" she asked him one evening as they walked back from checking the flock. The sun was setting over the moors, painting the heather gold and purple, and Myrsa was dancing ahead of them while Greenock drove the stragglers. Lucas glanced at her. "I told you, I needed work. You could get work anywhere, work that pays. Maybe I like it here." "There is nothing here but rocks and sheep and wind." "Some people like rocks and sheep and wind. You are avoiding the question." He was quiet for a moment, watching Myrsa spin in circles with her arms out. "I spent a long time after my family died just moving. One place to another, never staying. Always thought if I kept moving I would outrun the grief." He shrugged. "Turns out you cannot outrun it, you can only learn to carry it, and after a while moving just felt like running for no reason. So you stopped here." I stopped where I was needed. There is a difference between running and choosing. Carys did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They walked in silence until they reached the cottage, where Greenock was already putting the staff away and Mersa was demanding supper. The weeks passed. The wall was finished, a beautiful thing that would stand for generations. Lucas moved on to the other tasks, working with the same steady patience. Carys found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way his hands moved, the way he spoke gently to the animals, the way he never lost his temper even when Greenock was being difficult. She was 42 years old, and she had loved one man with all her heart, and she had buried him under a cairn of stones on the hillside where the rockfall had taken him. She had promised herself she would not love again, would not risk that kind of loss twice. But Lucas made it difficult to remember that promise. He never touched her except by accident, never said anything that could be construed as courtship. But there was something in the way he looked at her sometimes, a warmth in his eyes that made her breath catch. And she found herself looking back, noticing the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the quiet strength in the way he carried himself. It terrified her. Greenock was the first to truly accept Lucas's presence, though it happened so gradually that Carys almost missed it. The boy started asking questions about the work, then helping without being asked, then actually seeking Lucas out to learn things. Lucas taught him to shear, spending patient hours showing him how to hold the sheep, how to angle the shears, how to work with the animal instead of against it. "You have a good hand for it," Lucas told Greenock after the boy successfully sheared his first ewe. "Your father would be proud." Greenock flushed with pleasure and ducked his head. "You think so? I know so." Carys watched from the barn door, her throat tight. She had not been able to teach Greenock to shear because she had never had the patience for it, had always left that task to Dravik. Seeing her son learn it now, seeing his pride in the accomplishment, was both a gift and a knife to the heart. Lucas caught her eye and nodded slightly as if he understood. Perhaps he did. Summer moved toward autumn. The hay was cut and stored, the flock was thriving, the walls were solid. Carys began to let herself hope that they might actually meet the estate's requirements at Martinmas, that she might keep the tenancy, that her children might grow up on this land as she and Dravik had planned. And then Greenock opened the hurdle gate. It happened on a morning when fog had rolled down from the high moors, thick and gray and blinding. Carys was in the cottage, working on the accounts, trying to make the numbers add up to something that would satisfy the steward. Mersa was at the table with her, drawing pictures with a bit of charcoal. Lucas had gone out early to check the flock, and Greenock had gone with him, or so Carys had thought. The boy came back alone, soaking wet and shaking just before noon. "Mama," he said, and his voice was small and terrified. "Mama, I did something bad." Carys was on her feet in an instant. "What happened? Where is Lucas? Are you hurt?" "I opened the north hurdle. I wanted to prove we did not need him. I wanted to show I could manage the flock myself." Greenock's voice broke. "But the ewes got out onto the peat hags, and I could not get them back, and Lucas went after them, and I lost him in the fog, and I do not know where he is." Carys felt the blood drain from her face. The peat hags were treacherous at the best of times, a maze of soft ground and hidden pools that could swallow a sheep or a man without warning. In fog, they were deadly. How long ago? An hour, maybe. "I tried to follow, but I got turned around. And stay here," Carys said. "Watch your sister. Do not leave this house." She grabbed her staff and her whistle and ran out into the fog, calling Lucas's name. The gray wall of mist swallowed her voice almost before it left her throat. She could barely see 10 feet in any direction, and the familiar landscape of the moors became alien and threatening. She found the open hurdle and the trampled ground where the flock had scattered. From there, she followed the tracks onto the soft ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. One wrong step and she would go through into the bog herself. But Lucas was out here somewhere, and the ewes, and she could not lose them. She could not lose him. The thought came unbidden and undeniable. She could not lose Lucas. Not to the bog, not to anything. Because somewhere in the last 3 months he had become essential. Not just to the farm, but to her. And the realization was terrifying and inevitable in equal measure. She heard the bleating before she saw them. A huddle of ewes standing on a patch of solid ground, confused and frightened. No sign of Lucas. "Lucas," she called again, and this time she heard an answering shout, distant and to her left. She found him 20 minutes later, waist-deep in a bog pool, holding Greenock against his chest. The boy was sobbing, clinging to Lucas with both arms, and Lucas's face was gray with cold and exhaustion. "I have you," Carys said, lying flat on the solid ground and reaching out with her staff. "Grab hold." Lucas wrapped one hand around the staff, the other still supporting Greenock, and Carys pulled with all her strength. The bog released them with a sucking sound, and they crawled onto solid ground, all 3 of them shaking. "The ewes," Lucas said through chattering teeth. "Damn the ewes." "Can you walk?" "I think so." They made it back to the cottage somehow, Carys leading, Lucas leaning on Greenock, the boy guiding him with desperate care. Mersa met them at the door, her eyes huge. "Get blankets," Carys ordered, "and stoke the fire high." She got Lucas out of his wet clothes with clinical efficiency, ignoring the impropriety of it, and wrapped him in every blanket she owned. Greenock stood by the fire, still shaking, and when Carys turned to him the words died in her throat at the look on his face. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Mama, I am sorry. I just wanted later," she said. "Get dry clothes. You too, Mersa. Move." She made tea with honey and forced Lucas to drink it, then made more for Greenock. The boy sat at the table with his hands wrapped around the mug, not looking at anyone. Lucas spoke first. "It was an accident," he said quietly. "Could have happened to anyone." "It was not an accident," Greenock said. "I opened the gate on purpose. I wanted you to fail. I wanted Mama to send you away." Carys felt something crack open in her chest. "Greenock, but you came after me anyway," Greenock continued, looking at Lucas now. "You saved me even though I tried to ruin everything." "Why?" Lucas studied the boy for a long moment. "Because you needed saving. Because you are important to your mother, which makes you important to me. Because I told her your welfare comes first, and I meant it. But I made a mistake. People make mistakes. What matters is what you do after." Greenock's face crumpled and he started to cry, the harsh sobs of a child who has been holding too much inside for too long. Carys moved to comfort him, but Lucas was faster, pulling the boy into a gentle embrace despite his own exhaustion. "It is all right," Lucas said. "You are all right. That is what matters." Carys stood frozen, watching this man comfort her son, and felt every wall she had built around her heart begin to crumble. That night, after Lucas had recovered enough to return to the barn and the children were asleep, Carys sat by the fire and let herself cry for the first time since Dravik had died. She cried for her husband, for her fear, for the impossible situation she had found herself in. And she cried because she was falling in love with Lucas Norwood and she did not know how to stop. The next morning Greenock went to Lucas and confessed everything, his voice steady despite his fear. Lucas listened without interrupting, then nodded. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That took courage. Are you going to leave?" "Why would I leave? Because I am terrible, because I almost got you killed. You made a bad choice. I have made plenty of those myself, but you owned up to it and that counts for something." Lucas paused. "Besides, I told your mother I would help get this farm ready for Martinmas. I do not break my word." Greenock swallowed hard. "I am sorry. I know, it is forgiven." After that, something shifted. Greenock stopped fighting Lucas's presence and started actively seeking his company, asking questions, helping without being asked. And Lucas, for his part, treated the boy with the same patient respect he had shown from the beginning. Carys did not tell Lucas she had learned the truth of what happened on the moors. She kept that knowledge to herself, turning it over in her mind late at night when sleep would not come. Lucas had protected Greenock from the consequences of his own actions, had taken the blame on himself by calling it an accident. He had done it without hesitation, without asking for gratitude or acknowledgement. He had put her child first, just as he had promised. And Carys, who had spent 8 months holding her small family together through sheer stubborn will, felt something in her finally begin to ease. She was not alone anymore. She did not have to carry everything by herself. It was a dangerous thing to feel. Autumn came in earnest, the heather fading from purple to brown, the nights growing cold. The work continued. Lucas repaired the sheep pens, reinforced the hay barn against winter storms, and helped Carys cull the flock to the right numbers for Martinmas. They worked side by side in companionable silence, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared labor. "What will you do after Martinmas?" Carys asked one evening as they walked back from the high pasture. The children were ahead of them, Mercer riding on Greenock's shoulders and chattering about the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Lucas glanced at her. "Had not thought about it much. You must have other work waiting, other places to go. Maybe, maybe not." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to leave?" The question caught her off guard. "I did not say that." "You did not answer it either." Carys took a breath. "I do not want you to leave, but I do not know what I am allowed to want any more." "Allowed? I loved my husband. I loved him so much it nearly broke me when he died. I promised myself I would not risk that again." Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. "Carys, I am afraid," she said. "I am afraid of caring about you and losing you. I am afraid of being wrong about someone twice." "I cannot afford to be wrong, Lucas, not with my children depending on me. You are not wrong about me." "How can I know that? How can anyone know that?" He looked at her for a long moment, and in the fading light his eyes were serious and kind. "You cannot know, not for certain. That is what trust is, choosing to believe anyway. I do not know if I have that kind of trust left in me." "Then I will wait until you do," Lucas said simply, "or until you decide you do not. Either way, I am not going anywhere unless you tell me to." Carys felt tears prick her eyes. "You are too patient. Maybe, or maybe I just know what I want and I am willing to wait for it." She wanted to ask what he wanted, but she was afraid of the answer, afraid that it was her and afraid that it was not. So instead she said, "The children are getting ahead of us. We should catch up." They walked back to the cottage in silence, but it was a different silence now, charged with things unsaid and possibilities unspoken. The weeks before Martinmas passed in a blur of final preparations. The flock was counted and recounted. The ledgers were updated. The farm was in better shape than it had been in a year, and Carys allowed herself to hope. Greenock had changed over the summer, growing taller and more confident. He still missed his father, but the bitter anger had faded, replaced by something more like determination. He worked hard, learned fast, and had started talking about the future as if he believed there would be one. Mercer, meanwhile, had adopted Lucas as a permanent fixture in her life, chattering to him about everything and nothing, demanding stories and attention and getting both without complaint. And Carys watched them together, her children and this patient man who had walked into their lives and simply stayed, and felt her heart slowly opening despite her fear. Martinmas arrived cold and gray, with a bitter wind blowing down from the high moors. Carys dressed in her best clothes, such as they were, and braided her dark hair with steady hands. The children were staying with her neighbor for the day, Greenock protesting but understanding, Mersa extracting promises of sweets in return for good behavior. Lucas emerged from the barn in clean clothes, his hair combed back, looking unexpectedly formal. "You are coming?" Carys asked, surprised. "You might need someone to vouch for the work that was done. I can speak to the quality of the walls and fences if it helps." "You do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to." They walked down to the village together, the journey taking 2 hours on foot. The steward's office was in the back of the inn, a cramped room that smelled of pipe smoke and old paper. The steward himself was a lean man named Edmund with ink-stained fingers and the weary expression of someone who had been doing this work too long. "Mrs. Greystone," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "And you are Lucas Norwood. I have been working Mrs. Greystone's holding since summer." Edmund's eyebrows rose slightly. "Hired help? I thought there was no money for that." "Room and board," Lucas said. "The farm needed work and I needed a place to stay." The steward grunted and pulled out a ledger. "Let us see what we have. 900 acres, mixed pasture and moorland. Last year's count was 200 breeding ewes. Actual lamb count at sale was 140. This year's requirement is 160 to maintain tenancy." He looked up. "Can you meet it?" 173, Carys said, with 40 kept back for breeding stock replacement. Edmund checked his ledger, then nodded slowly. "That is a significant improvement." "The walls were repaired," Lucas said. "Fox predation is down. The flock health is better because the pasture rotation was improved. The hay stores are up 20% from last year." "You did all that in 4 months." "We did," Carys said firmly. "The holding is in good order." The steward made notes in his ledger, his expression unreadable. Carys felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything depended on this moment, on this man's decision. Her children's future, the home they had always known, the land Dravik had loved. Finally, Edmund looked up. "The tenancy will continue. I will need to update the records." "Who should be listed as the primary holder?" "Myself," Carys said. "And Mr. Norwood." There was a long pause. Carys looked at Lucas, and he looked back at her, his gray eyes steady and patient. "What are you asking?" she said carefully. "I am asking if there are 4 names that should go on this tenancy agreement, or 1. Edmund said with the bluntness of a man who had no time for dancing around subjects. "Because if Mr. Norwood is staying on and if there are children who will inherit, I need to know that now for the records." Carys felt the floor tilt beneath her. 4 names. Hers, Lucas's, Greenock's, Mersa's. A family. A future. She opened her mouth and no words came out. Lucas spoke instead, his voice quiet. "That is Mrs. Greystone's decision to make, not mine. I am here as long as she wants me here, in whatever capacity she chooses." Edmund sighed and dipped his pen. "I will put down 1 name for now. You can come back and amend it later if circumstances change." He filled out the paperwork with quick efficiency, then pushed it across the desk. "Sign here." Carys signed with a hand that only trembled slightly. The steward sanded the ink, folded the document, and handed her a copy. "Congratulations, Mrs. Greystone. The holding is yours for another year. Try to keep the improvement going." Outside the inn, Carys stood in the pale November sunlight and felt the weight of the last 8 months finally lift from her shoulders. She had done it. They had done it. The farm was secure, the children's future was safe, and she had not failed Dravik's memory. Lucas stood beside her, waiting patiently. 4 names, Carys said finally. He asked about 4 names, he did. If you stayed, if the children inherited, if we were, she could not quite say the word. A family, Lucas finished gently. "Yes. I am afraid," Carys said again. I am so afraid of this, I know. But I am more afraid of losing you, of waking up one day and finding you gone because I was too scared to say what I wanted. Lucas turned to face her fully. What do you want, Carys? She took a breath. The words felt enormous, impossible, but they were also the truest thing she had ever said. I want you to stay, not just for the work, not just for the children, for me. I want, she faltered, then pushed on. I want those 4 names on the tenancy. I want you to be part of this family if you want it, if you will have us. If I will have you, Lucas laughed, a soft sound of disbelief. Carys, I would have said yes 3 months ago if I thought you were ready to hear it. I am terrible at this, Carys said. I do not know how to court or be courted. I do not even know if that is what this is. I think this is whatever we want it to be. She looked at him, this patient man who had walked into her life and simply stayed, who had put her children first even when it cost him, who had waited for her to be ready without complaint or pressure. Then I want it to be a marriage, she said. If you do, not right away maybe, but someday. When we are both ready, and I want your name on the tenancy with mine because that farm is as much yours now as it is mine, and I want everyone to know it. Lucas smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Yes, yes, yes to all of it. Marriage, tenancy, family, yes. Carys felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been knotted tight since the day Dravik died. I am still afraid. That is all right, I am a little afraid too. Of what? Of failing you, of not being what you need. She reached out and took his hand, the first time she had touched him deliberately, and felt the calluses that matched her own. You have been what I needed since the day you arrived. I am sorry it took me so long to see it. You saw it when you were ready. That is all that matters. They stood there in the street, holding hands, and Carys felt the future opening up before her like a map. It was not the future she had planned with Dravik, but it was good anyway, full of possibility and hope. The children will be waiting, she said finally. We should collect them. They will want to know about the tenancy, and about you staying. Myrsa will be thrilled, Lucas said, and Greenock. I think Greenock will be all right with it. They walked to the neighbor's farm hand in hand, and when the children saw them, Myrsa came running, her face alight with questions. Did we pass? Can we keep the farm? Is Lucas staying? Yes to all 3, Carys said, catching her daughter up in a hug. Greenock approached more slowly, his eyes moving between his mother and Lucas and their clasped hands. Are you getting married? He asked bluntly. Eventually, Carys said, if that is all right with you. The boy considered this. Will Lucas be my father then? I cannot replace your father, Lucas said quietly. I would never try, but I can be someone who cares about you and helps raise you if you will let me. Greenock looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. It was not a declaration of love or acceptance, but it was enough. It was a beginning. Myrsa, meanwhile, was already planning. Can we have a party? Will there be cake? Can I help pick flowers? Will we all have the same last name? Slow down, Carys laughed. We have time for all of that. They walked back to the farm as the sun set, the 4 of them together, and Carys felt something she had not felt since Dravik died. She felt like she was coming home. That evening, after the children were in bed, Lucas and Carys sat by the fire and talked about the future. They would marry in the spring, after the lambing, when the farm was past the hardest season. They would update the tenancy records to include Lucas's name and list Greenock and Myrsa as heirs. They would continue the work of building the farm into something that could support them all. I never thought I would have this again, Lucas said. A home, a family. I never thought I would want it again, Carys admitted, but I do, with you. He reached out and took her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. The wedding took place in late April, on a bright morning when the moorland was covered in new heather, and the lambs were strong and healthy in the fields. It was a small ceremony, just the four of them and the village priest, held in the cottage with the windows open to let in the spring air. Carys wore a new dress that she had woven and sewn herself, dyed the green of new grass. Lucas wore his best shirt and the waistcoat that Greenock had helped him mend. Myrsa had woven flowers into everyone's hair and insisted they all wear them, even Lucas, who bore the crown of daisies with patient good humor. Greenock stood beside his mother, solemn and proud, and when the priest asked if anyone objected to the union, the boy spoke up clearly. "I do not object. Lucas is a good man and he makes my mother happy. That is what my father would have wanted." Carys felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. The priest pronounced them married, and Lucas kissed Carys gently, and Myrsa cheered and threw flower petals everywhere. That night they celebrated with a feast that was simple but joyful. The neighbors came, bringing food and well wishes, and the cottage was full of laughter and music. Myrsa danced until she could barely stand, and Greenock stayed up late listening to the men talk about farming and weather and the prospects for the coming year. And when everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Lucas and Carys stood outside under the stars, looking out over the moorland that was theirs now together. "No regrets?" Lucas asked softly. Carys smiled. "None, you. Not a single one." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. The grief and the fear and the slow, patient building of something new. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For waiting. For putting the children first. For being exactly who you are. That is not something to thank me for. That is just love." And it was, Carys thought. It was love in its quietest, most patient form. Not the wild passion of her youth, but something steadier and deeper. Love that showed up and did the work. Love that waited. Love that chose them, all of them, every single day. The seasons turned. The farm prospered under their joint care, the flock growing strong and healthy. Greenock took to the work with increasing skill and confidence, and by his 13th birthday, he could shear and wall and manage the flock as well as any adult. Myrsa grew from a chattering child into a bright, curious girl who could name every plant on the moor and every star in the sky. And Carys and Lucas built a life together, stone by stone, day by day. 2 years after their wedding, on a cold February night, Carys gave birth to a daughter with green skin and her father's gray eyes. They named her Glenna, and she was born squalling and healthy into Lucas's careful hands. Greenock and Myrsa were besotted with their baby sister, competing for the chance to hold her and make her smile. Lucas walked the floor with her on sleepless nights, singing old songs in a rough voice that somehow always soothed her. "I did not think I would have this again," he told Carys one night, cradling Glenna against his chest. "I thought that part of my life was over." "I am glad it is not," Carys said. "So am I." Glenna grew into a sturdy, determined toddler who followed Greenock everywhere and demanded to help with every task. When she was 2, Carys gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Arian. She was quieter than Glenna, with thoughtful eyes and a talent for finding small, beautiful things, stones, feathers, flowers that she would bring to her mother like treasures. The cottage expanded to accommodate the growing family, Lucas building on 2 new rooms with Greenock's help. The farm expanded too. The tenancy increased to include additional pasture land as their reputation for quality stock grew. Myrsa, at 10, announced that she wanted to learn healing and began apprenticing with the village herb woman. Greenock, at 15, was already being consulted by other farmers for his skill with sheep. Glenna, at 3, had learned all the words to Lucas's songs and sang them constantly, loudly, and slightly off-key. And Carys, watching her family around the dinner table one evening, felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. This life, this loud, chaotic, beautiful life was hers. It was nothing like what she had planned, but it was everything she needed. "What are you smiling about?" Lucas asked, catching her eye across the table. "Everything," she said. "All of this." He smiled back, understanding perfectly when Glenna was 4 and Arian 2, Carys found herself pregnant again. This time the baby was a boy, born during the spring lambing in a rush that left no time for the midwife. Lucas delivered his son with steady hands while Greenock kept Carys calm and Mersa managed the younger children. They named him Quentin, and he was born with his father's brown hair and his mother's stubborn jaw. "3 children," Lucas said, holding his son. "I have 3 children." "5," Carys corrected gently. "You have 5 children, or have you forgotten Greenock and Mersa?" Lucas looked up at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "I have not forgotten. I will never forget. They gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "They love you," Carys said. "We all do." The years continued to pass in the sweet rhythm of farm life. Harvests and birthdays, storms and celebrations, the endless cycle of seasons. Greenock grew into a man, taking over more and more of the farm management. At 18, he married a human girl from the next valley, a farmer's daughter with a practical nature and a warm smile. Mersa became a skilled healer, moving between the village and the farm, caring for both people and animals. She showed no interest in marriage, declaring herself wedded to her work, and neither Carys nor Lucas pushed her. Glenna, Arian, and Quentin grew up knowing nothing but love and security. The older children's childhood grief something they knew only through stories. And Carys and Lucas grew older together, their hair graying, their hands growing more gnarled, but their love deepening with every year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Carys up to the high pasture where they had first walked together all those years ago. The moorland was purple with heather, and the sky was vast and blue above them. "I have something to tell you," he said. Carys felt a flutter of alarm. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. That is what I wanted to say." He took her hands. "I have been thinking about the day I walked up that track and saw you trying to reset that gate post. I was just looking for work, for a place to stop for a while. I never expected to find a home. You gave me one too," Carys said, "when I thought mine was lost forever." "I love you," Lucas said. "I loved you when you were scared and grieving and did not want to love anyone again. I love you now, happy and at peace. I will love you when we are both too old to climb this hill. I just wanted you to know that." Carys felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too, so much it still scares me sometimes. But you do it anyway." "But I do it anyway," she agreed. They stood together on the high moor, looking out over the land they had built together, and Carys thought about the notice that had come pinned to the gate so many years ago. The crisis that had felt like the end of everything had actually been a beginning. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not stopped that day?" she asked. "Sometimes, but not often. I prefer to think about what did happen instead." "Which is, I found you. You let me stay. We built something good." It was, Carys thought, as simple and as complicated as that. They walked back down to the farm together, hand in hand, and found their children waiting. Greenock and his wife had brought their first baby to visit, a tiny boy who already had his grandfather's patient eyes. Mersa had come home for the celebration, bringing honey cakes from the village. Glenna, Arian, and Quentin had decorated the cottage with flowers and hung garlands over the doors. "Surprise!" Mersa shouted, and everyone laughed. They celebrated late into the night, the cottage full of family and love and the kind of joy that comes from years of choosing each other, over and over again. And later, when the children were finally asleep or had gone to their own homes, Lucas and Carys sat by the fire and talked about nothing and everything, as they had done 10,000 times before and would do 10,000 times again. "Happy?" Lucas asked. "Happy," Carys confirmed. And she was. Despite the grief that had brought her here, despite the fear and the struggle and the hard seasons, she was happy. She had her children, her farm, her husband. She had built a life that mattered, that would continue after she was gone. She had chosen love, even when it was terrifying. And that had made all the difference. The fire burned low, and outside the window the moorland stretched away into the darkness, beautiful and eternal and home. Everything was exactly as it should be. Years later, when Carys was old and her hair was white, she would sit by that same fire and tell her grandchildren the story of how she met their grandfather. She would tell them about the notice on the gate, about her fear, about the patient man who had walked up the track looking for work and stayed for love. "But how did you know he was the right one?" her granddaughter would ask, and Carys would smile and say, "He put your parents first." And when someone does that, when they care about what matters most to you before they care about themselves, that is how you know. It was the truest thing she had ever learned, and the best gift she had ever been given. And she carried it with her, warm and certain as the hearth fire, all the days of her life.